Hi, I'm Maya Rodriguez. The day I walked into that conference room expecting to discuss quarterly projections, I never imagined I'd overhear the three words that would shatter everything I believed about my career. "She's just a diversity hire," came the voice of Bradley Henderson, the senior analyst I'd been working alongside for 2 years. Management needed to check a box, you know. Hispanic woman in tech, 2-for-1 special. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The laughter that followed felt like ice water in my veins. I stood frozen behind the partially open door, my laptop clutched against my chest, watching through the gap as 4 of my colleagues sat around the mahogany table I'd helped pick out when we redesigned the office last spring. "Come on, Brad," said Jennifer Walsh, though her tone suggested she was more amused than offended. "Maya's not that bad at her job." "Not that bad?" This from Marcus Coleman, our team lead who I'd stayed late with just last week, helping debug a critical system failure. She couldn't code her way out of a paper bag if her life depended on it. I've been covering for her mistakes for months. The room erupted in agreement. Voices I recognized, people I'd shared lunches with, collaborated on projects with, even celebrated birthdays with. They spoke about me like I was some charity case, a burden they'd been forced to carry. "The worst part," Bradley continued, leaning back in his chair with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question whether you belong somewhere, "is that she actually thinks she earned that promotion last year. Like, Maya, sweetie, there were 3 white guys with better qualifications who got passed over so the company could look progressive. My promotion. The one I'd worked 18-hour days for. The one that required me to learn 2 new programming languages on my own time. The one where I'd increased our team's efficiency by 37% in my first quarter. They were talking about it like it was handed to me on a silver platter." Jennifer's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "I heard from Rachel in HR that they're fast-tracking her for the senior developer position. Can you imagine? She'll probably get it too, just to keep up appearances." "Over my dead body," Marcus said, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. "I've been waiting 3 years for that role. I'm not about to let some affirmative action hire waltz in and take what's mine." The conversation continued, but the words began to blur together. I backed away from the door on trembling legs, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. The hallway that had always felt familiar now seemed foreign, like I was seeing it through different eyes. The motivational posters on the walls, the company values printed in cheerful fonts, the diversity and inclusion awards displayed in the lobby downstairs, it all felt like an elaborate joke that everyone was in on except me. I made it to the bathroom before the tears started. Locking myself in the farthest stall, I sank onto the closed toilet seat and let the weight of what I'd just heard crush down on me. Every achievement, every late night, every successful project completion, all of it was being attributed to my race and gender rather than my abilities. The bathroom door opened, and I heard heels clicking across the tile floor. I held my breath, trying to muffle any sound that might give away my location. "Maya?" It was Sarah Kim, one of the junior developers. "I saw you run in here. Are you okay?" I couldn't answer. If I opened my mouth, everything would come tumbling out, and I wasn't ready to put words to what I'd just experienced. "I heard them," Sarah said quietly, and my blood went cold. "In the conference room. I was coming back from the printer and, I'm so sorry, Maya, they're wrong. You know that, right?" I finally managed to speak, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Are they, though? Am I really just here because of what I look like?" "Maya, no," Sarah's voice was firm. "I've worked with you for 2 years. I've seen what you can do. Remember the Peterson account? You saved that entire project when their legacy system crashed. You worked for 3 straight days to rebuild their data architecture from scratch. That wasn't luck or charity. That was pure skill." I wanted to believe her, but the voices from that conference room were louder than her reassurance. They'd been so casual about it, so matter-of-fact, like it was common knowledge that everyone accepted except me. "How long have they been saying this?" I asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "But Maya, it doesn't matter what they say. Your work speaks for itself." But that was just it. Apparently my work wasn't speaking loudly enough. Despite everything I had accomplished, despite the recognition from clients, despite the measurable improvements I'd brought to every project I touched, my colleagues still saw me as nothing more than a checkbox on someone's diversity report. I emerged from the stall 20 minutes later, after Sarah had left and the bathroom had returned to its sterile silence. My reflection in the mirror looked foreign: red eyes, blotchy cheeks, hair that had escaped from its neat ponytail. I looked exactly like someone who didn't belong in this polished corporate environment. Exactly like someone who'd been crying in a bathroom stall because she couldn't handle the truth about her situation. The walk back to my desk felt like a funeral march. Every conversation I passed seemed to stop when I appeared. Every glance felt loaded with meaning I'd never noticed before. My cubicle, the one I'd decorated with photos of my family, my college graduation, the coding bootcamp certificate I was so proud of, now felt like a museum exhibit, the diversity hire in her natural habitat. I sat down and stared at my computer screen, but the code I'd been working on might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. My mind kept replaying the conversation, dissecting each laugh, each casual cruelty. Bradley's voice saying I was a 2-for-1 special. Jennifer's dismissive, "Not that bad." Marcus's barely concealed anger that I might take his promotion. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the only person on the team who'd had to prove myself twice as hard to get half as far. I graduated summa cum laude from UC Berkeley with a computer science degree. I'd worked at a startup for 3 years before joining Techstone Industries, building their mobile platform from the ground up. I'd earned every certification, attended every training, volunteered for every difficult assignment that others avoided. But none of that mattered if my colleagues had already decided that my presence was purely performative. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Elena. "How's the new project going? Still loving the job?" I stared at the message for several minutes before typing back, "Yeah, everything's great." The lie felt heavy in my thumbs. Elena had been so proud when I'd gotten this job. She'd called our parents in Phoenix, practically screaming about how her little sister was working for one of the most prestigious tech companies in Seattle. She'd posted about it on social media, telling everyone how hard work and determination always pay off. How could I tell her that, according to my coworkers, hard work and determination had nothing to do with it? That I was just filling a quota, playing a role in someone else's corporate theater? The afternoon crawled by in a haze of pretending to focus on my code, pretending not to notice when conversations stopped as I walked by, pretending that the invitation to grab drinks after work wasn't conspicuously missing from my email when I saw the team forwarding it around to everyone except me. At 5:30, I packed up my things and headed for the elevator. The parking garage was nearly empty, just a few scattered cars under the harsh fluorescent lights. I sat in my Honda Civic for 10 minutes before starting the engine, trying to summon the energy to drive home and pretend everything was normal. My apartment in Capitol Hill felt different that night. The same cream-colored walls, the same second-hand furniture I'd carefully chosen and arranged, the same view of the Space Needle from my bedroom window. But somehow, it all felt smaller, less permanent, like I was playing house in someone else's life. I ordered takeout from the Thai place down the street and ate it standing in my kitchen, too restless to sit down. The silence was suffocating, filled with echoes of that conversation. I turned on Netflix, then turned it off. Picked up a book, then put it down. Everything felt pointless when the thing I'd built my identity around, my career, my competence, my place in the professional world, had been revealed as nothing more than an elaborate act of corporate charity. Around 9 p.m. my phone rang. Elena's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But Elena had a sixth sense about these things. If I didn't answer, she'd probably drive up from Portland to check on me. "Hey, Hermana," she said, her voice bright with its usual energy. "I was just thinking about you. How was your day?" The question that should have been simple felt like a trap. How was my day? Well, I discovered that everything I thought I knew about my professional life was a lie, and apparently everyone except me has been in on the joke for 2 years. How do you package that into casual conversation? "It was fine," I said, settling onto my couch. "Just the usual stuff." "Come on, Maya. I know you better than that. You sound like someone stole your dog. What's going on?" Elena had always been able to read me like an open book, even over the phone. Growing up, she'd been the outgoing one, the one who made friends easily, and never seemed to doubt her place in the world. I'd been the quiet one, the studious one, always working twice as hard to achieve what seemed to come naturally to others. "It's nothing," I insisted. "Just tired." "Bullshit." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Talk to me. What happened?" And suddenly, despite my best efforts to hold it together, everything came pouring out. The overheard conversation, the casual cruelty, the way they dismissed every achievement I was proud of. Elena listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and outrage in all the right places. When I finished, the silence stretched between us for several seconds. "Maya," Elena finally said, and her voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. "Those people are idiots. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." But what if they're right? The question I'd been afraid to ask all day finally escaped. What if I really am just here because they needed to hit some diversity numbers? What if I'm not as good as I thought I was? "Stop it." Elena's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Stop it right now. Do you remember when you were 12 and you taught yourself to code because you were bored during summer vacation? Do you remember when you fixed Mrs. Chen's computer when all the guys at the repair shop said it couldn't be done? Do you remember when you graduated with the highest GPA in your major?" I remembered all of it, but somehow those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else. "They don't know you," Elena continued. "They don't know what you're capable of. And honestly, the fact that they're so threatened by you that they have to tear you down says everything about their insecurity and nothing about your abilities. I just don't know if I can keep going there, knowing what they think of me." "You can," Elena said firmly. "You absolutely can. Because you know what? Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that office and show them exactly what they're dealing with. Not a diversity hire. Not a charity case. A brilliant, talented woman who earned her place through merit, and who's about to make them all regret underestimating her." After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my living room for a long time, Elena's words echoing in my mind. Outside my window, the city sparkled with 1,000 lights, each one representing someone working late, someone chasing their dreams, someone refusing to give up. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe I did belong there, regardless of what my colleagues thought. Maybe their opinions said more about them than about me. But as I finally headed to bed, preparing to face another day of pretending everything was normal, I had no idea that the conversation I'd overheard was just the beginning. I had no idea that Bradley, Jennifer, and Marcus were planning something that would test everything I thought I knew about office politics and corporate warfare. I fell asleep that night believing that the worst thing that could happen was continuing to work in an environment where I wasn't respected. I had no clue that in the coming weeks, I would discover exactly how far people were willing to go to protect what they believed was rightfully theirs, and how brutal the consequences could be when someone like me refused to stay in the box they'd built for me. The next morning arrived with Seattle's typical gray drizzle, matching my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning as fragments of yesterday's conversation replayed in an endless loop. By 6 a.m., I gave up trying to rest and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Standing in my kitchen, wrapped in the oversized Stanford hoodie Elena had given me for Christmas, I tried to psych myself up for another day at Techstone Industries. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard Bradley's laugh echoing in my mind, that casual cruelty that came so naturally to him. The commute downtown felt longer than usual. On the bus, I found myself studying the faces around me, wondering if they too had conversations about people like me when we weren't in the room. The businessman in the expensive suit checking his phone. The barista is heading to her morning shift. Did they see me as just another diversity checkbox? Or did they see Maya Rodriguez, software developer and problem solver? Techstone's gleaming tower rose 34 floors above Pioneer Square, its glass facade reflecting the cloudy sky. I'd felt so proud the first time I walked through those revolving doors 2 years ago, briefcase in hand, ready to prove myself in one of Seattle's most competitive tech environments. Now those same doors felt like the entrance to a battlefield where I'd been fighting a war, one didn't even know existed. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me 2 minutes to compose myself. Deep breaths, shoulders back, game face on. Whatever happened yesterday was done. Today, I will focus on my work and let my code speak for itself. But the moment I stepped into the office, I knew something had shifted. The usual morning chatter died down as I walked past the break room where several colleagues were gathered around the coffee machine. Bradley looked up from his conversation with Jennifer and gave me what could generously be called a smile, though it reminded me more of a shark sizing up its prey. "Morning, Maya," he said, his tone dripping with false friendliness. "How are you doing today?" There was something in the way he emphasized the word doing that made my skin crawl. Like he was testing me, waiting to see if I'd crack under the pressure of knowing what he really thought of me. "Fine, thanks," I replied, keeping my voice steady as I continued toward my desk. "That's great to hear," Jennifer chimed in, her voice equally saccharine. "We're all just so glad you're part of the team." The emphasis on glad felt like a knife between my ribs. They knew. Somehow, they knew that I'd overheard their conversation yesterday. Maybe they'd seen me by the conference room door, or maybe Sarah had let something slip. Either way, they were playing with me now, like cats toying with a wounded mouse. I settled at my workstation and opened my laptop, determined to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of coding. But concentration proved elusive when every few minutes someone would walk by my cubicle with an exaggerated greeting or an unnecessarily loud comment about teamwork and collaboration. Around 10 a.m., Marcus approached my desk carrying a stack of papers. "Maya, I need you to take a look at these bug reports from the Morrison client. Seems like there are some issues with the authentication module you worked on last month." He dropped the stack with more force than necessary, and I caught a glimpse of at least 15 separate incident reports. My heart sank. The authentication module had been one of my proudest achievements. A clean, elegant solution that had streamlined the client's login process and reduced support tickets by 60%. "I'll look into these right away," I said, already pulling up the code repository on my screen. "Good," Marcus said, but he didn't walk away. Instead, he leaned against my cubicle wall, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know, Maya, I was just thinking about what great timing this is." "Timing?" "Well, with the senior developer position opening up next month, it's really important that we all demonstrate our ability to handle complex problems independently." His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Management will be watching closely to see how we each respond to challenges." The implication was crystal clear. He was setting me up to fail, presenting me with what looked like a mountain of problems right before the promotion review period. If I couldn't solve these issues quickly and efficiently, it would reflect poorly on my capabilities. If I did solve them, well, he'd probably find a way to discredit that too. "I understand," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "I'll get started on these immediately." After Marcus left, I dove into the bug reports with growing confusion. The issues described were legitimate, but they seemed to stem from implementation problems on the client side, rather than flaws in my code. Someone had configured the authentication settings incorrectly, creating security vulnerabilities that had nothing to do with the module I'd built. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously documenting each problem and tracing it back to its source. By lunchtime, I had a clear picture of what had gone wrong, and it wasn't pretty. Someone had deliberately misconfigured the client's system, creating problems that would make my work look sloppy and unreliable. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just casual workplace discrimination or thoughtless comments. Someone was actively sabotaging my work, setting me up to look incompetent right before the biggest promotion opportunity of my career. I sat back in my chair, staring at my screen full of evidence, trying to process what this meant. The authentication module worked perfectly when configured correctly. I could prove that with logs and test results. But by the time I finished investigating and documenting everything, how much damage would already be done to my reputation? "Hey Maya, how's the bug hunting going?" Bradley's voice made me jump. He'd appeared beside my cubicle like a vulture circling a carrion. "Fine," I said carefully. "Just working through some configuration issues." "Configuration issues?" He raised an eyebrow with mock concern. Oh no, that sounds serious. I hope the client doesn't lose faith in our development team over this. The way he said our development team made it clear he didn't consider me part of that group. I was the weak link, the diversity hire who couldn't handle the technical challenges, the reason the team's reputation might suffer. I'll have a full report ready by end of day, I said, turning back to my screen. I'm sure you will. Bradley's voice carried a smugness that made my stomach turn. It's so important to document these kinds of learning experiences, don't you think? After he left, I found myself shaking with anger. Learning experiences. As if my 2 years of flawless code and successful project deliveries counted for nothing. As if this obvious setup was somehow my fault for not anticipating sabotage. I grabbed my laptop and headed to the small conference room on the far side of the floor, needing space to think without feeling like I was being watched. The room was empty, its glass walls offering a view of Elliott Bay in the distance. Ships moved slowly across the gray water, going about their business without drama or deception. Opening my laptop, I began crafting a detailed email to David Chen, our department manager. I laid out the technical evidence systematically, showing how the authentication module had been deliberately misconfigured and explaining the real source of each reported bug. I attached log files, configuration screenshots, and test results that proved my code was working exactly as designed. But as I read over the email before sending, doubt crept in. Would David believe me, or would this look like desperate excuses from someone who couldn't handle criticism? Would presenting evidence of sabotage make me seem paranoid and difficult to work with? In a corporate environment where team player was the highest compliment and difficult was the kiss of death, accusing colleagues of deliberate sabotage was a dangerous move. I saved the email as a draft and closed my laptop. I needed more evidence, more proof of what was happening. One incident could be explained away as miscommunication or honest mistakes. But if this was part of a larger pattern, there would be other examples. The rest of the afternoon, I became a detective in my own workplace. I pulled up old project files, reviewed email chains, and examined version control logs. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, there has been a subtle but consistent pattern of interference with my work. Code reviews that took weeks longer than normal, delaying my project timelines. Email chains where I was mysteriously left off important communications, causing me to miss crucial deadlines. Technical specifications that were changed without notification, making my completed work appear to miss the mark. None of it was dramatic enough to constitute obvious harassment. Each incident could be explained away as normal workplace friction or honest oversight. But taken together, the pattern was unmistakable. Someone, or multiple someones, had been systematically undermining my work for months. The worst part was realizing how effectively it had worked. I'd internalized each setback as my own failing, pushing myself to work harder and longer to compensate for what I thought were my own shortcomings. Late nights fixing mistakes that weren't mistakes. Weekend work to catch up on deadlines I'd missed due to withheld information. Constant second-guessing of my own abilities when projects didn't go as smoothly as expected. They'd gaslit me into believing I was the problem, when the real problem was their coordinated effort to make me fail. By 5 o'clock, I had documented over a dozen instances of subtle sabotage. My hands trembled as I compiled the evidence, not from fear but from fury. I'd spent months questioning my competence, wondering if I really belonged in this industry, pushing myself to the point of exhaustion trying to prove I deserved to be here. And all the while, they'd been pulling the rug out from under me at every opportunity. I was so absorbed in my documentation that I didn't notice Jennifer approaching the conference room until she knocked on the glass wall. "Maya? Are you okay in there? You've been holed up for hours." Her concern seemed genuine, but I'd learned not to trust appearances. I saved my work and opened the door. "Just working on some documentation," I said. "That's dedication." Jennifer's smile was warm, but I noticed she was trying to see my laptop screen. "You know, I hope you're not stressing too much about those bug reports Marcus gave you. We all make mistakes sometimes." There it was again, the implication that I'd made mistakes, that the problems were my fault. Even her apparent sympathy was laced with condescension. "Thanks for the concern," I said, closing my laptop pointedly, "but I think I've got it handled." "Of course you do." Her smile faltered slightly. Well, don't work too hard. Work-life balance is so important. As she walked away, I wondered if that was a threat. Was she suggesting I was the type of employee who couldn't handle the pressure? Or was she genuinely trying to be kind? In this environment of constant psychological warfare, it was impossible to tell the difference between friendly advice and calculated manipulation. I packed up my things and headed for the elevator, my laptop bag heavy with evidence of months of systematic sabotage. The parking garage was nearly empty, fluorescent lights flickering overhead as I walked to my car. I sat in the Honda for several minutes, processing everything I'd discovered. The drive home through rush hour traffic gave me time to think about my options. I could take my evidence to David Chen and hope he'd take it seriously. I could go to HR and file a formal complaint. I could find a new job and leave all this behind me. Or I could fight back. The thought surprised me. I'd never been the confrontational type, had always believed that hard work and merit would speak for themselves. But merit was meaningless when the game was rigged. Hard work was pointless when others were actively sabotaging your efforts. Back in my apartment, I spread the printed evidence across my dining room table like a detective's murder board. Email threads, code reviews, project timelines, version control logs. It all told the same story of systematic professional assassination. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim. "How are you holding up? I know yesterday was rough." I stared at the message for a long time before responding, learning a lot about my colleagues. "Want to grab coffee tomorrow morning before work? I think there are some things you should know." My heart rate spiked. Sarah knew something more, something she hadn't shared yesterday in the bathroom. I typed back quickly, "Yes, 7 a.m. at Pike Place Roasters? See you there." I set the phone down and looked again at the evidence scattered across my table. Tomorrow morning, Sarah would fill in more pieces of the puzzle, but already the picture was becoming clear. This wasn't just casual workplace discrimination or unconscious bias. This was warfare, deliberate and sustained, designed to push me out of a job I'd earned through merit and hard work. They wanted me to fail. They expected me to crumble under the pressure, to prove their assumptions about diversity hires who couldn't handle the real world of competitive tech. But as I organized my evidence into neat piles, I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt and self-doubt from yesterday was crystallizing into something harder and sharper. They'd underestimated me once by assuming I was just a token hire. Now they were underestimating me again by thinking I'd go quietly when I discovered their game. I looked out my window at the Seattle skyline, lights twinkling in the darkness like stars. Somewhere out there, Bradley and Jennifer and Marcus were probably celebrating another successful day of psychological warfare. They had no idea that their target had just become their biggest threat. Tomorrow I will start gathering allies. I would build an unshakable case. And then I would show them exactly what happened when they tried to destroy someone who refused to be destroyed. Pike Place Roasters at 7 a.m. was exactly what I needed. The familiar comfort of coffee shop anonymity mixed with the energy of early morning Seattle. Sarah was already there when I arrived, hunched over a laptop in the corner booth, her usual iced latte half finished despite the October chill outside. She looked up as I approached, and I could see the weight of whatever she was carrying in her tired eyes. Dark circles suggested she'd slept about as well as I had. "Maya," she said, closing her laptop quickly, "thanks for meeting me." I slid into the booth across from her, wrapping my hands around the ceramic mug of black coffee I'd ordered. "You said there were things I should know." Sarah glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. "What I'm about to tell you could get me fired if the wrong people find out. But after what I heard yesterday, I can't keep quiet anymore." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of an email thread. The sender names were blacked out, but I could see it was from about 6 months ago. "I found this in my deleted items folder last night. I'd forgotten I was even copied on it." I squinted at the small text. It was a discussion about project diversification, corporate speak that made my skin crawl even before I understood what it meant. "Keep reading," Sarah said softly. The email chain discussed, quote, "managing expectations around recent hiring initiatives and ensuring quality standards don't slip due to inclusion pressures." But it was the final message that made my blood run cold. "We need to be strategic about Martinez's integration. If natural performance gaps emerge, we can address the diversity hire issue without appearing discriminatory. Martinez. They were talking about me, but they'd gotten my name wrong. Even in their private conspiracy emails, they couldn't be bothered to learn my actual surname. There's more, Sarah said, swiping to another screenshot. This one was more recent, from just 3 weeks ago. This is from Marcus to Jennifer. The message was brief but devastating. Maya's getting too comfortable. Time to remind her where she stands. The authentication project is perfect for showing her limitations. I stared at the phone screen until the words blurred. They hadn't just stumbled into sabotaging my work. They'd planned it, calculated it. The authentication module that I'd worked so hard on, that I'd been so proud of, had been targeted specifically as a way to undermine me. How did you get these? I asked. Sarah's face flushed. I've been documenting things for months. Not just about you, about other people too. There's a pattern of behavior from certain team members that goes beyond normal workplace politics. She pulled up another set of screenshots, this time showing a group chat that included Bradley, Jennifer, Marcus, and 2 other senior developers I recognized but rarely interacted with. The messages were casual, almost friendly, but the content was chilling. Check out Maya's code review comments. She actually thinks she knows what she's talking about. Someone needs to explain to her that participation trophies don't work in the real world. I give her 6 more months before she realizes she's in over her head and quits. We should start a betting pool. The messages went back months, a steady stream of mockery and dismissal that painted me as incompetent, delusional, and temporary. They discussed my projects like I was a child playing dress-up in grown-up clothes. My achievements like lucky accidents that would eventually be exposed as fraudulent. Sarah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, why are you showing me this? She looked down at her hands, wrapped around her coffee cup. Because I know what it's like to be the only one who looks like you in a room full of people who think you don't belong. And because, she paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Because there's more you need to know about why they're so desperate to get rid of you. My heart was already racing, but something in her tone made it beat even faster. What do you mean? Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up what looked like an internal company directory. This is the current team structure for our department. Notice anything? I scanned the organizational chart. Our team of 12 people included 10 white men, Sarah and me. Pretty typical for a tech company, unfortunately. Now look at this, Sarah said, pulling up another document. This is the projected structure for next year, assuming the senior developer promotion goes through, and we get approval for the 2 additional junior positions we've requested. The new chart showed a dramatically different picture. With my promotion and the new hires, both of whom, according to the notes, were strong candidates who happened to be women of color, our team would be almost 40% diverse. So? I asked, though I was starting to understand. So this. Sarah pulled up one more document, this one marked Confidential Executive Review Only. It was a company-wide diversity analysis, showing each department's demographic breakdown and comparing it to corporate goals. Our department was flagged in red as significantly below target for inclusion metrics. There was a note that failure to improve diversity numbers could result in, quote, leadership restructuring and accelerated hiring mandates from corporate. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. It wasn't just that they saw me as undeserving. They saw me as a threat to the comfortable homogeneity they'd cultivated. If I succeeded, if I got promoted, it would open the floodgates for more people who looked like me. Their exclusive club would become diluted with perspectives and experiences they didn't want to deal with. They're not just trying to hold me back, I said slowly. They're trying to scare off anyone else who might follow. Sarah nodded grimly. Exactly. Make an example of you, show that diversity hires can't cut it in the real world, and corporations will back off the inclusion pressure. But I'm not a diversity hire, I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. I earned this job. I know that, you know that, but they've convinced themselves otherwise, and that's what matters to them. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Maya, there's something else. The senior developer position you're being considered for? Bradley applied for it too, so did Marcus, if you get it. I will become their boss. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All this sabotage, all this systematic undermining, It wasn't just about keeping me in my place. It was about preventing me from ascending to a position where I could hold them accountable for their behavior. Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it and paled. Shit, that's Jennifer. She's asking where I am. Apparently there's an emergency team meeting in 20 minutes. Emergency meeting? Maya, I don't think this is a coincidence. I think they know we're meeting. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had someone seen us together yesterday? Had Sarah's questions about the email threads raised suspicions? Or was this just paranoia brought on by discovering the depth of the conspiracy against me? You should go, I said. I don't want you getting in trouble because of me. Sarah packed up her laptop quickly. Maya, be careful today. If they suspect you know something, they might escalate their tactics. She was halfway to the door when she turned back. Oh, and Maya, there's one more thing. David Chen, our department manager? He's not part of their group chat, which means either he doesn't know what's happening or he's deliberately staying out of it. After Sarah left, I sat in the coffee shop for another 30 minutes, staring out at the morning commuters rushing past on First Avenue. Everyone looked so normal, so unconcerned with office politics and workplace warfare. I envied their ignorance. My phone buzzed with the same meeting notification Sarah had received. Emergency team meeting, 8:30 a.m., conference room B. The subject line gave no hint of what the emergency might be, but my gut told me it was connected to whatever Sarah and I had been discussing. I finished my coffee and made the walk back to Techstone's tower, my laptop bag feeling heavier with each step. The evidence I'd compiled yesterday, combined with what Sarah had shown me this morning, painted a picture of systematic discrimination that went far beyond casual workplace bias. This was organized, deliberate, and potentially illegal. The 15th floor was buzzing with unusual energy when I stepped off the elevator. People were clustered in small groups, whispering urgently. The normal morning routine of coffee and casual conversation had been replaced by something that felt more like crisis management. I made it to my desk and was pulling up my email when Bradley appeared beside my cubicle, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. Maya, glad you're here. David needs to see you in his office before the team meeting. My stomach dropped. Did he say what about? Bradley's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Something about irregularities in your recent project work. I'm sure it's nothing serious. The walk to David Chen's corner office felt like a death march. Through his glass walls, I could see him reviewing a thick folder of documents, his expression grim. He looked up as I knocked, gesturing for me to come in. David was in his mid-40s, soft-spoken but respected throughout the company for his technical expertise and fair management style. In the 2 years I'd worked under him, he'd always been professional and supportive, which made the tension radiating from him now even more unsettling. Maya, please sit down, he said, closing the folder. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention. I settled into the chair across from his desk, trying to keep my expression neutral. What kind of concerns? David opened the folder and pulled out what I recognized as the authentication module documentation I'd submitted yesterday, along with the bug reports Marcus had given me. But there were additional documents I didn't recognize, what looked like performance reviews and project assessments. Several team members have expressed concerns about the quality of your recent work, David said carefully. The Morrison client implementation has generated significant issues, and there are questions about whether proper testing protocols were followed. This was it. The setup Sarah had warned me about, the culmination of months of sabotage. They were using the deliberately misconfigured authentication module as evidence of my incompetence. David, I said, keeping my voice steady, I spent yesterday afternoon analyzing those bug reports. The issues stem from implementation problems on the client side, not flaws in my code. I understand that's your perspective, David said, but the perception of quality issues, regardless of the underlying cause, reflects poorly on our entire team. Perception, not reality, but perception. I realized with growing anger that it didn't matter what the actual facts were. They'd successfully created a narrative of incompetence that was becoming its own reality. Furthermore, David continued, there have been concerns raised about your collaborative approach to project work. Several colleagues have mentioned feeling like you're not fully integrated with the team's workflow, I thought about the group chat Sarah had shown me, the casual mockery and dismissal that had been going on behind my back for months. Of course I wasn't integrated. They'd been actively excluding me while making it seem like my own failing. I've always been available for collaboration, I said. In fact, I've often volunteered for additional responsibilities when other team members were overloaded. David nodded, but his expression remained troubled. I know you have, Maya, and your willingness to take on extra work has been noted. But leadership is about more than individual contribution. It's about being a team player and maintaining the confidence of your colleagues. The words hit me like a slap. Team player, confidence of colleagues. All the coded language used to exclude people who didn't fit the established culture, while making it sound like a merit-based decision. David, I said, leaning forward slightly, are these concerns related to my performance, or are there other factors at play here? His eyes flickered with something, surprise maybe, or recognition that I was asking a more direct question than he'd expected. Maya, I want to be clear that this company values diversity and inclusion. Your contributions to this team have been significant. But, I could hear the but coming even though he hadn't said it yet. However, David continued, the senior developer position requires someone who can command respect from the entire team and manage complex interpersonal dynamics. The feedback I've received suggests there may be some challenges in that area. There it was. They couldn't question my technical skills directly. My code was too good. My project results too successful. So they were attacking my leadership potential, using the very discrimination they'd practiced as evidence that I couldn't handle a leadership role. I sat back in my chair, processing the elegant trap they'd constructed. If I pushed back too hard, I'd be seen as defensive and difficult to work with. If I accepted their assessment quietly, I'd be admitting that I wasn't qualified for advancement. Either way, they won. But then I thought about Sarah's screenshots, about the months of documented evidence sitting in my laptop bag, about the systematic conspiracy that had brought me to this moment. David, I said, my voice calm but firm, I'd like to request a formal review of my performance evaluation and the feedback that's been provided about my work. I believe there may be some inconsistencies that need to be addressed. David's eyebrows rose slightly. Maya, I'm not sure that's necessary. Sometimes it's better to focus on moving forward rather than relitigating past issues. I understand that perspective, I said, but I think it's important for everyone involved that we have a complete and accurate picture of what's been happening on this team. For a moment, we stared at each other across his desk. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out exactly what I knew and how much trouble it might cause. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, Maya, I can arrange for a formal review process if that's what you prefer. But I want you to understand that these processes can be complicated. Sometimes they uncover things that are better left undisturbed. It was a warning, thinly veiled but clear. Pushing for a formal review would mean war, and wars had casualties on both sides. I understand, I said, standing up. Thank you for your time, David. As I walked back toward the conference room where our team meeting was already in progress, I felt something shifting inside me. The scared, self-doubting person who'd cried in a bathroom stall 2 days ago was gone, replaced by someone harder and more determined. They wanted a war? They were about to get one. But unlike their sneaky campaign of sabotage and manipulation, I was going to fight with something they couldn't counter. The truth. Walking into Conference Room B felt like entering a courtroom where I was both the defendant and the only person who didn't know what crime I was being charged with. The entire team was already seated around the polished table, their conversations dying as I took the only remaining chair, coincidentally the one farthest from David Chen at the head of the table. Now that everyone's here, David began, his voice carrying a formality that hadn't been there in our private meeting, we need to address some quality control issues that have come to light regarding the Morrison client implementation. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, my heart was racing. This was it. The public execution Sarah had warned me about, designed to humiliate me in front of the entire team and justify whatever decision they'd already made about my future. Marcus cleared his throat and opened a laptop. I've compiled a comprehensive analysis of the authentication module issues. As you can see, he clicked to a PowerPoint presentation that filled the wall-mounted monitor. The first slide read, Critical Security Vulnerabilities, a case study in proper code review. The presentation was masterful in its manipulation. Marcus had taken every misconfiguration issue caused by the client's improper implementation and reframed it as a fundamental flaw in my original code. Screenshots of error messages were displayed without context. Performance metrics were cherry-picked to show only the failed transactions, not the successful ones that made up 97% of the authentication attempts. The core problem, Marcus continued, clicking to a slide titled Root Cause Analysis, stems from insufficient security protocols in the initial design phase. While the code technically functions, it lacks the robust error handling necessary for enterprise-level deployment. I watched my colleagues' faces as Marcus spoke. Some looked genuinely concerned, apparently buying into his narrative. Others, Bradley and Jennifer particularly, wore expressions of barely concealed satisfaction. They weren't learning about these issues for the first time. They'd helped craft this presentation. "Maya," David said when Marcus finished, "would you like to respond to these findings?" This was the moment they'd been building toward. If I defended my work too aggressively, I'd look defensive and unprofessional. If I accepted their criticism meekly, I'd be admitting to incompetence. Either way, they won. But I'd spent the last 2 days preparing for exactly this scenario. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, opening my own laptop. "I appreciate the detailed analysis. I'd like to add some context to help everyone understand the complete picture." I clicked to my own presentation, one I'd been working on since 5 a.m. that morning. The first slide was titled Authentication Module, Implementation versus Configuration Issues. As Marcus correctly noted, there were problems with the Morrison deployment. However, the issues stemmed from client-side configuration errors rather than flaws in the authentication module itself. I clicked to a side-by-side comparison showing the recommended configuration settings versus what had actually been implemented. The client's IT team modified our security protocols without consulting our documentation, creating the vulnerabilities Marcus identified. When the module is configured correctly, as shown in these test results from 3 other successful deployments, performance metrics consistently exceed industry standards. I could see Marcus's jaw tighten as I methodically dismantled his presentation. Each slide I showed provided clear evidence that the problems were implementation issues, not code defects. Server logs, error traces, and performance data all supported my case. Furthermore, I continued, clicking to a slide showing response times and security metrics. The authentication module has actually improved system performance for every client who implemented it according to specifications. Average login time decreased by 43%, and security incidents dropped to 0 across all properly configured installations. The room was quiet when I finished. Several colleagues were looking between Marcus and me with confused expressions, clearly trying to reconcile his doom and gloom presentation with my data-driven rebuttal. David cleared his throat. "Thank you both for your thorough analysis. I think we need to table this discussion until we can review all the technical details more carefully." "Actually," I said before anyone could move to adjourn the meeting, "there's one more thing I'd like to address." I clicked to my final slide, Pattern Recognition in Project Management. The slide showed a timeline of my last 6 months at Techstone, highlighting every project delay, every missed communication, every technical issue that had impacted my work. To anyone looking casually, it would seem like evidence of poor performance. But I'd color-coded each incident to show its actual cause. As you can see, there's been an unusual pattern of communication breakdowns and process failures affecting my projects. Emails not received, specification changes not communicated, code reviews delayed beyond normal timeframes. I let that sink in for a moment. I've documented each incident thoroughly, including server logs showing email delivery confirmations and version control timestamps proving when specifications were modified. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bradley was staring at his hands. Jennifer had gone very still. Marcus's face had shifted from confident to calculating, like he was trying to figure out exactly what I knew. "Maya," David said carefully, "are you suggesting these issues were intentional?" "I'm not suggesting anything," I replied evenly. "I'm simply presenting data that shows a pattern of unusual project management irregularities. I think it would be valuable for the team to understand these patterns so we can improve our processes going forward." It was a diplomatic way of saying what we all knew, that I'd caught them red-handed in their sabotage campaign. But by framing it as a process improvement opportunity rather than an accusation, I'd made it harder for them to dismiss me as paranoid or difficult. After the meeting ended, I packed up my laptop and headed back to my desk, very aware of the whispered conversations breaking out behind me. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and everyone could feel it. "Maya!" Sarah appeared at my cubicle 20 minutes later, glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. "Can you meet me at lunch?" "There's someone I think you should talk to." "Who?" "Rachel Morrison from HR. She's been asking questions about our department's culture and management practices. I think she might be conducting some kind of investigation." My pulse quickened. If HR was already looking into our department, it meant someone else had filed a complaint or raised concerns. I might not be fighting this battle alone. "Where do you want to meet?" "The food court at Pike Place Market. Noon. Rachel will be there too. She thinks it's just a casual lunch between colleagues." The rest of the morning crawled by in a haze of forced normalcy. I worked on code reviews and answered emails, but I could feel eyes on me constantly. Conversations stopped when I walked by. People who usually greeted me avoided eye contact. By 11:30, the tension was suffocating. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator, needing to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the office before I said or did something that would give them ammunition against me. Pike Place Market on a Tuesday afternoon was the perfect cover for a clandestine meeting. Tourists mixed with locals, the sounds of vendors calling out their wares providing natural cover for sensitive conversations. I found Sarah and a woman I didn't recognize sitting at a small table near the fish market, both picking at salads. "Maya," Sarah said as I approached. "This is Rachel Morrison. Rachel, Maya Rodriguez." Rachel was probably in her mid-30s, with shoulder-length brown hair and the kind of carefully neutral expression that comes from years of handling workplace conflicts. She extended her hand with a warm smile. "Maya, it's nice to finally meet you. Sarah's told me a lot about your work on the authentication systems." We made small talk for a few minutes. The weather, the Pike Place crowds, the overpriced salads. But I could sense Rachel was evaluating me, trying to get a read on my personality and credibility. "So," Rachel said eventually, lowering her voice, "Sarah mentioned you've been having some challenges with team dynamics lately?" I chose my words carefully. "There have been some communication issues that have impacted project workflows." Rachel nodded, pulling out her phone and opening what looked like a notes app. "I've been conducting some routine culture assessments across different departments. Would you be comfortable sharing your perspective on the collaborative environment in your team?" This was it. My chance to go on the record with someone who had the authority to investigate and take action. But I also knew that once I started down this path, there would be no going back. Before I answered that, I said, "Can you help me understand what kind of assessment you're conducting? Is this related to specific complaints or part of a broader company initiative?" Rachel's expression remained neutral, but I caught something in her eyes. A flicker of respect, maybe, for asking the right questions. "Both, actually. We've received some informal feedback about communication patterns and team cohesion in several departments. Your group was flagged for a routine culture review, but some recent developments have elevated the priority of that assessment." "What kind of recent developments?" Rachel glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Last week, we received an anonymous report through our ethics hotline suggesting discriminatory treatment of employees in your department. The report was light on specifics, but it mentioned patterns of exclusion and professional undermining that warranted investigation." My heart jumped. Someone else had filed a report. Someone else had seen what was happening and had the courage to speak up about it. "Can you tell me anything about the nature of the anonymous report?" I asked. "Not specific details, but I can say that the concerns raised align with some of the patterns Sarah described when she asked to meet with me." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Maya, if you've experienced discriminatory treatment, either overt or subtle, I need you to know that this company takes those allegations very seriously." The moment of truth. I could continue pretending everything was fine, maintain the status quo, and hope the investigation would uncover the truth without my direct involvement. Or I could take the risk of speaking up, knowing it would put a target on my back but might be the only way to stop what was happening. "Rachel," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system, "I have documented evidence of systematic professional sabotage that I believe is motivated by racial and gender bias." Rachel's pen stopped moving. "What kind of evidence?" I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I'd been compiling. Email chains, group chat screenshots, project timeline analysis, version control logs. I have months of documentation showing a coordinated effort to undermine my work and damage my professional reputation. For the next 45 minutes, I walked Rachel through everything. The overheard conversation that started it all, Sarah's screenshots of the discriminatory group chats, the authentication module sabotages, the pattern of communication breakdowns, and project interference. Rachel took notes steadily, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting copies of specific documents. Her professional demeanor never slipped, but I could see her anger building as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. "Maya," she said when I finished, "this is substantially more serious than what was reported in the anonymous complaint. What you're describing could constitute harassment, discrimination, and potentially constructive dismissal, if the goal is to force you to leave the company." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I conduct a formal investigation. I'll be interviewing team members, reviewing email and chat logs, examining project management processes. The people involved in this behavior will be asked to respond to specific allegations." Sarah leaned forward. "What kind of protection does Maya have during the investigation, if they realize she's the one who filed the complaint?" "That's a valid concern," Rachel said. "Maya, I'm going to recommend that you be temporarily reassigned to a different team while the investigation is ongoing. It will protect you from retaliation and ensure that evidence isn't compromised." "For how long?" "These investigations typically take 4 to 6 weeks, depending on complexity. Given the amount of documentation you've provided and the number of people involved, I'd estimate we're looking at the longer end of that range." After Rachel left, Sarah and I walked back toward the office in relative silence. The afternoon was overcast, typical for October in Seattle, matching my mood perfectly. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, as we waited for the light to change at First Avenue. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me feels relieved that it's finally out in the open, but part of me is terrified about what comes next. "Maya, you did the right thing. What they've been doing is illegal, not to mention cruel and unprofessional." "I know. But knowing something is right doesn't make it easier to live with the consequences." We were half a block from Techstone's tower when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you had an interesting lunch today. Careful who you trust. Some conversations aren't as private as you think." I showed the message to Sarah, whose face went pale. "How could they know about our lunch?" she whispered. I looked up at the glass tower looming above us, thinking about security cameras, corporate surveillance, and the lengths people would go to protect their positions. "I don't know," I said, "but it looks like the war just escalated." Back at the office, the atmosphere was even more charged than when I'd left. People looked up when I walked by, but their expressions were different now. Wary, calculating. Word was spreading that something was happening, even if most people didn't know what. I'd barely sat down at my desk when David Chen appeared beside my cubicle. "Maya, I need to see you in my office again. HR has requested some additional documentation regarding your project work." As I followed him across the floor, I caught Bradley watching from his desk, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Whatever was coming next, he knew about it. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I realized that having evidence and filing complaints was only the beginning. The real battle was just starting, and my opponents had been playing this game a lot longer than I had. David's office felt smaller this time, the walls seeming to close in as I sat across from him and two people I didn't recognize. The woman was tall, blonde, and carried herself with the kind of corporate authority that came from years of handling messy situations. The man beside her looked like he'd stepped out of a legal thriller. Expensive suit, silver hair, eyes that missed nothing. "Maya," David said, his voice more formal than I'd ever heard it, "this is Victoria Sterling from corporate HR and James Patterson from our legal department. They have some questions about the allegations you've made regarding workplace discrimination." Victoria opened a thick folder and pulled out what I recognized as copies of all the documentation I'd provided to Rachel Morrison just 2 days earlier. Ms. Rodriguez, we've reviewed the materials you submitted to our investigation. Some of these documents raise significant concerns about potential violations of employee privacy and confidentiality. My stomach dropped. They weren't here to discuss the discrimination I'd reported. They were here to turn the tables and make me the problem. I'm sorry, I don't understand, I said carefully. What privacy violations? James Patterson leaned forward, his voice smooth but with an underlying edge. Several of the screenshots you provided appear to be from private group communications between colleagues. Accessing and distributing private messages without consent could constitute a breach of our acceptable use policy. I felt the trap closing around me. They were going to claim that my evidence was inadmissible because of how it was obtained, while completely ignoring the discriminatory content of those messages. The screenshots were provided to me by a colleague who was concerned about workplace harassment, I said. I didn't access anyone's private communications without permission. But you were aware that the person providing these screenshots might have been accessing communications they weren't authorized to see? Victoria asked, making notes on a legal pad. This was exactly what Sarah had warned me about, that filing a complaint would put both of us at risk. They were going to throw her under the bus to discredit my evidence and protect the people who'd been harassing me. I was provided evidence of discriminatory behavior that was affecting my work and career, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My focus was on addressing the harassment, not on investigating how the evidence was obtained. James smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. Ms. Rodriguez, surely you understand that in any legal proceeding, the method of obtaining evidence is just as important as the content of that evidence. If we allowed employees to spy on their colleagues' private communications, it would create a very dangerous precedent. Is that what this is? I asked. A legal proceeding? The three of them exchanged glances. Victoria closed her folder and folded her hands on the table. Maya, the company takes discrimination allegations very seriously. However, we also have to consider the broader implications for workplace trust and collegiality. Collegiality. There was that word again. The same coded language used to protect people like Bradley and Marcus, while making victims like me seem like troublemakers. What are you proposing? I asked. David cleared his throat. We think it might be best for everyone involved if you took a temporary leave of absence while we sort through these issues. Full pay, of course, and your position will be held for you. A leave of absence. The classic corporate move to make a problem disappear while protecting the people who created it. Send me away, let the controversy die down, and hope I'd either quit or come back quietly and drop the whole thing. And if I refuse? James's expression hardened slightly. Then we would have to proceed with a formal investigation into the privacy violations, which could result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. There it was, the ultimatum: take the leave and stay quiet, or be fired for trying to expose discrimination. Either way, Bradley and Marcus and Jennifer got what they wanted, me gone, and their behavior protected. But as I sat there looking at their expectant faces, something inside me snapped. I thought about all the nights I'd worked late trying to prove myself. All the times I'd doubted my own abilities because of their subtle sabotage. All the other women and minorities who would come after me and face the same treatment if no one stood up to it. I need to think about it, I said finally. Victoria nodded. Of course, take the rest of the day. We'll need your decision by tomorrow morning. I left David's office feeling like I'd been gut-punched, but as I walked back toward my desk, I noticed something different about the atmosphere on the floor. People weren't just avoiding eye contact anymore. They were actively turning away when they saw me coming. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The few colleagues who did acknowledge me did so with expressions of pity or embarrassment. Word had spread. Somehow, everyone knew about the HR investigation and my allegations. And based on their reactions, the narrative being circulated wasn't flattering to me. I was packing up my laptop when Marcus appeared beside my cubicle. His usual cocky demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Maya, he said, his voice low enough that nearby colleagues couldn't hear, I think we need to have a conversation. I don't think that's a good idea, I replied, continuing to pack my things. Oh, I think it's a very good idea. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. You see, I just got out of a very interesting meeting with HR about your allegations. Seems like you've been making some serious accusations about people's character. I looked up at him, noting the barely controlled anger in his eyes. I reported discriminatory behavior that was affecting my work. Nothing more, nothing less. Right. Discriminatory behavior. His laugh was bitter. You know what I think, Maya? I think you realized you weren't cutting it here and decided to play the victim card rather than admit you were in over your head. That's not what happened. Isn't it? Marcus leaned against my cubicle wall, his voice getting louder despite his apparent attempt to keep it low. Because from where I sit, it looks like someone who got hired to fill a quota and then couldn't handle the reality of working in a competitive environment. Marcus, I think you should walk away from this conversation, I said, standing up to face him directly. Or what, you'll file another complaint? Report me for more harassment? He made air quotes around the word, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Here's the thing, Maya. Everyone knows what this is really about. You're not getting that promotion, and you can't handle it. The mention of the senior developer position sent a chill through me. I'd been so focused on defending myself against their attacks that I'd almost forgotten about the original prize they were fighting to keep away from me. The promotion hasn't been decided yet, I said. Marcus's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Actually, it has. David made the announcement to the senior staff this morning. Congratulations are in order for me. The words hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been meeting with HR and legal, fighting to defend my reputation against privacy violation charges, they'd been moving ahead with the promotion decision. Marcus had gotten exactly what he wanted. You're lying. Am I? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me an email thread. The subject line read, Senior Developer Position, Final Decision. I could see David's name in the sender field, and Marcus's name highlighted in the recipient list. Effective Monday, I'll be the new senior developer for our team, which means, Maya, that if you decide to come back from whatever leave of absence they're offering you, you'll be reporting to me. The thought of working under Marcus, of having him as my supervisor after everything he'd done, made my stomach turn. It would be the ultimate humiliation, not just losing the promotion I'd earned, but having to take orders from the person who'd systematically sabotaged my work to prevent me from getting it. There's still the investigation, I said weakly. What investigation? Marcus laughed. Maya, they've already made it clear that your evidence was obtained through privacy violations. Your little friend Sarah is probably going to be fired for corporate espionage. The whole thing is going to disappear, and you're going to look like a disgruntled employee who tried to destroy her colleagues' careers because she couldn't handle losing. As if summoned by his words, Sarah appeared at the entrance to our section, flanked by 2 security guards and carrying a cardboard box. Her face was pale, her eyes red with tears. She was being escorted out of the building. Our eyes met across the office floor, and I could see the apology and fear in her expression. She'd been fired for helping me, for providing the evidence that proved what we both knew was true. And now that evidence was being dismissed as illegally obtained, making her sacrifice meaningless. Like I said, Marcus continued, watching Sarah's perp walk with satisfaction. The investigation is over. The only question now is whether you're smart enough to take the leave and disappear quietly, or if you want to keep fighting a battle you've already lost. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing beside my cubicle with the entire office pretending not to watch, while simultaneously absorbing every detail of what had just happened. The message was clear to everyone. This is what happens when you challenge the established order. I finished packing my things in silence, hyper-aware of every whispered conversation and sideways glance. By the time I made it to the elevator, I felt like I was drowning in the weight of everyone's expectations and judgments. The parking garage was almost empty, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah fired. Marcus was promoted. My evidence was dismissed. The investigation was effectively killed before it could uncover anything meaningful. They'd won, not just the battle, but the entire war. And they'd done it while making me look like the villain in the process. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard about your little chat with Marcus. Hope you're finally ready to be realistic about your situation. Some fights aren't worth winning. Another anonymous threat, but this one felt different, more personal. Like it was coming from someone who'd been in that meeting with Victoria and James. Someone who knew exactly how cornered I'd been. I started the car and drove home through the late afternoon traffic, my mind racing through options that all seemed to lead to the same dead end. Take the leave, and hope they'd eventually let me come back to a hostile work environment where I'd be reporting to Marcus. Refuse the leave and face termination for privacy violations. Find a new job and start over, knowing that Marcus would provide whatever references future employers requested. Back in my apartment, I spread the evidence I'd so carefully compiled across my dining room table one more time. Email chains showing systematic sabotage, screenshots of discriminatory group chats, documentation of professional undermining that had been going on for months. All of it meaningless now because Sarah had accessed private communications to obtain it. All of it was dismissed because corporations would rather protect harassers than admit they had a discrimination problem. I was still staring at the evidence when my phone rang. Elena's name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. I wasn't ready to explain how completely I'd failed, how naive I'd been, to think that documentation and formal complaints could overcome institutional bias. But Elena had a sixth sense about these things, and if I didn't answer, she'd probably drive up from Portland again. Maya, her voice was tight with concern. I just got off the phone with Sarah Kim. She told me what happened today. Sarah called you? She's scared, Maya. They fired her for helping you, and now they're threatening to blacklist her from other tech companies if she talks about what she saw. The confirmation that Sarah had been fired hit me harder than Marcus's gloating. She'd stuck her neck out to help me expose the truth, and now she was paying the price while the people who'd been harassing me got promoted. Elena, I don't know what to do. They've turned everything around to make me the villain. According to them, I'm the one who violated company policy by collecting evidence of discrimination. That's bullshit, and you know it. It doesn't matter what I know, it matters what they can make stick in a corporate investigation. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then her voice came back harder, more determined. Maya, do you remember what Papa used to say about bullies? I thought back to our childhood, to our father's advice when Elena came home crying, because kids at school were picking on her for being the smart girl with the weird name and the packed lunch that smelled like cumin. He said bullies count on you fighting by their rules, on their turf where they have all the advantages. That's right. And what did he say you should do instead? Change the rules. Change the battlefield. Make them fight on your terms instead of theirs. Exactly. Elena's voice was fierce now. Maya, you've been fighting this battle inside their system, by their rules. Of course you're losing. The system was designed to protect people like them and eliminate threats like you. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you stop playing defense and start playing offense. Stop trying to prove you belong in their club and start building your own. After we hung up, I sat in my darkened living room for hours, staring out at the Seattle skyline and thinking about Elena's words. She was right. I'd been fighting to earn acceptance from people who would never accept me, trying to succeed within a system that was rigged against me from the beginning. But what if I stopped trying to play their game and started playing my own? Around midnight, I opened my laptop and started researching. Not job boards or complaint procedures, but something else entirely. Something that would let me fight back on my own terms, with my own rules. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't the plan of someone trying to fit into an existing system. It was the plan of someone ready to build something new, something better. Marcus thought he'd won by getting me fired and taking my promotion. He had no idea that he'd just created his biggest nightmare. A competent, angry woman with nothing left to lose and the skills to do something about it. 3 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in South Lake Union, watching the rain streak down the windows while my laptop compiled the final build of what would become the most important project of my career. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was less than 2 miles from Techstone Industries, where Marcus was probably struggling through another crisis caused by the authentication system he'd inherited from me. My phone buzzed with a notification I'd been waiting for. TechCrunch. Former Techstone developer launches revolutionary security platform, raises $2.3 million in seed funding. The article was everything I'd hoped it would be. A detailed look at Rodriguez Security Solutions, the company I'd founded after leaving Techstone. The platform I'd built from scratch that solved every problem the authentication module had faced, while adding features that made it 10 times more powerful. And most importantly, the growing list of clients who were abandoning Techstone's outdated systems for my innovative solutions. But the real satisfaction came from the paragraph near the end. Rodriguez's rapid success has highlighted some troubling questions about talent recognition in the tech industry. Several former Techstone employees have reached out to TechCrunch with allegations that discrimination may have cost the company one of its most promising developers. I closed the laptop and smiled, thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had started the morning after Elena's advice about changing the battlefield. Instead of calling Techstone to accept their forced leave of absence, I'd called a lawyer, not a corporate employment attorney, but an intellectual property specialist named Patricia Valdez, who'd built a reputation for helping engineers protect their innovations. Maya, Patricia had said during our first meeting, you developed that authentication system on your own time, using your own equipment, before you joined Techstone. Do you have documentation proving that? I'd shown her the GitHub repository with timestamps proving I'd created the initial version during my time at the startup, months before Techstone ever existed in my life. I'd shown her the patent application I'd filed independently, thinking it might be valuable someday. This changes everything, Patricia had said with a grin that reminded me of a shark scenting blood. Not only do you own the intellectual property, but Techstone has been licensing your technology to clients without proper attribution or compensation. Within a week, Patricia had filed papers establishing my ownership of the authentication system technology. Within 2 weeks, she'd sent cease and desist letters to every client using Techstone's implementation of my system. Within a month, half of Techstone's major accounts were facing the choice between paying hefty licensing fees for continued use of my technology or finding alternative solutions. The beauty of it was that Marcus, in his eagerness to take credit for my work, had made the situation exponentially worse. As the new senior developer, he signed off on expanded deployments of the authentication system to 3 new major clients, increasing Techstone's liability for unauthorized use of my intellectual property. My phone rang, interrupting my reminiscence. The caller ID showed Rachel Morrison. Maya, Rachel's voice was tight with barely controlled excitement. I have news, big news. I'm listening. The Department of Labor finished their investigation into Techstone's employment practices. They found systematic patterns of discrimination in hiring, promotion, and retention practices. The company is facing federal penalties and mandatory oversight. The DOL investigation had been Rachel's idea. After Techstone's HR department had effectively killed her internal investigation, she'd resigned and taken her documentation to federal authorities. It turned out that my case wasn't isolated. There were patterns of discriminatory behavior across multiple departments that violated federal employment law. What kind of penalties? I asked. $2 million in fines, mandatory diversity training, external oversight of hiring and promotion processes, and individual accountability for managers who participated in discriminatory practices. Individual accountability. That was the phrase I'd been hoping to hear. Rachel, does that mean? David Chen, Marcus Coleman, and Jennifer Walsh are all facing disciplinary action. David's been demoted and transferred to a different division. Marcus was terminated yesterday. I felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost physical. Marcus, who'd gloated about taking my promotion and making me report to him, had lost everything, not because of corporate politics or personal vendettas, but because federal investigators had found evidence of the same discriminatory behavior I tried to report internally. There's more, Rachel continued. Bradley Henderson resigned before he could be terminated. Apparently he'd been leading the group chat that Sarah documented, and some of the messages crossed the line from workplace harassment into potential criminal territory. Criminal? Threats, intimidation, conspiracy to damage your professional reputation. The FBI's cybercrime unit is reviewing whether any federal laws were broken. After Rachel hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. The people who'd tried to destroy my career hadn't just lost their jobs. They were facing legal consequences that could follow them for years. But the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was what I'd built in the meantime. Rodriguez Security Solutions had grown from a one-person consulting practice to a team of 12 brilliant engineers, half of whom were women and minorities who'd faced similar challenges in traditional tech companies. We'd created something more than just a successful business. We'd built a workplace culture based on merit, respect, and genuine collaboration. My phone buzzed with another call. This time, the caller ID made me smile. Sarah Kim. Maya, did you see the TechCrunch article? Just finished reading it. How are you doing? Sarah had landed on her feet after being fired from Techstone, finding a position at a startup that valued her skills and integrity. But more importantly, she'd become the star witness in both the DOL investigation and my intellectual property lawsuit. I'm doing great. Actually, I'm calling because I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. My company is looking for a new security platform, and our CTO wants to meet with you about potentially licensing your system. But Maya, there's something else. Something I think you should know before we move forward. What is it? Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Techstone is hemorrhaging clients. The authentication system has been failing left and right since Marcus took over maintenance. He tried to improve your code and broke half the security protocols. 3 major clients have already terminated their contracts. I felt a moment of professional concern for the users who were affected by Marcus's incompetence, but it was overshadowed by poetic justice. The system he'd claimed credit for building was collapsing under his actual management. That's not all, Sarah continued. I heard from a friend who still works there that they're trying to hire you back. Apparently, David Chen's replacement wants to offer you Marcus's old position. Senior developer, significant raise, equity package. They want to hire me back as a senior developer, the position they gave to Marcus while accusing me of privacy violations? That's exactly what I said when I heard it. The cognitive dissonance is incredible. I laughed, surprising myself with how genuinely amused I was by the irony. 6 months ago, being offered that position would have felt like vindication, like proof that I belonged in their world. Now it felt like a consolation prize from people who'd finally realized the magnitude of their mistake. Sarah, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret getting involved? Speaking up, I mean. You lost your job because of it. There was a long pause. Then Sarah's voice came back, stronger and more certain than I'd ever heard it. Maya, I spent 2 years watching them tear you down and telling myself it wasn't my problem. I convinced myself that keeping my head down and staying out of it was the smart career move. But you know what I realized after I got fired? What? Staying silent in the face of injustice isn't neutral, it's complicated. They were able to do what they did to you because people like me let them. When I finally spoke up, I wasn't just helping you. I was reclaiming my own integrity. After we hung up, I walked outside into the Seattle drizzle, needing fresh air to process everything that had happened. 3 months ago, I'd been sitting in a bathroom stall crying because I thought my career was over. Now I was running a successful company, federal investigators had vindicated my discrimination claims, and my former tormentors were facing real consequences for their actions. But the most satisfying part wasn't their downfall. It was the knowledge that I'd proven them wrong on every level. I wasn't a diversity hire who couldn't handle the technical challenges. I was an innovator who'd built something better than anything they could have imagined. I wasn't the weak link dragging down their team performance. I was the talent they'd been too blind to recognize and too arrogant to appreciate. My phone rang one more time as I walked back to my office, a converted warehouse space in Georgetown where my team was putting the finishing touches on our next major product release. The caller ID showed Elena Rodriguez. Hermana, Elena's voice was practically glowing with pride. I just finished reading the TechCrunch article to Mama and Papa. Papa started crying. Happy tears, I hope. The happiest. He said he always knew you were going to show them what Rodriguez women are made of. I could hear the emotion in Elena's voice, and it brought tears to my own eyes. My family had supported me through the darkest months of this ordeal, never wavering in their belief that I was strong enough to overcome it. Elena, there's something I want to tell you. What's that? Thank you. For that night when you told me to stop fighting on their battlefield and start building my own. That advice changed everything. Maya, you would have figured it out eventually. You've always been the smartest person I know. You just needed to remember that intelligence isn't about fitting into other people's systems. Sometimes it's about having the courage to build better ones. When I walked into my office, the energy was electric. My team was gathered around a bank of monitors, running final tests on the security platform that would launch next week. The technology was revolutionary. Everything I dreamed of building when I was stuck in that cubicle at Techstone, trying to prove I deserved to be there. Maya, called out Alex Chen, my lead engineer, the penetration testing results are back. The system is rock solid, better performance metrics than anything currently on the market. I looked around at my team, brilliant engineers who'd chosen to work for Rodriguez Security Solutions not because they had to, but because they believed in what we were building. We weren't just creating better technology, we were proving that diverse teams with inclusive leadership could outperform traditional tech companies in every measurable way. Team, I said, raising my coffee cup in an impromptu toast. 6 months ago, some people thought I was just a diversity hire who didn't belong in this industry. Today, we're launching a platform that's going to revolutionize cybersecurity. Tomorrow, we're going to change what it means to build a tech company. The cheers from my team were loud enough to echo through the warehouse space. But the real satisfaction came from something quieter. The knowledge that I'd taken the worst experience of my professional life and transformed it into the foundation for something extraordinary. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from an email address I didn't recognize at first, bradley.henderson.consulting@gmail.com. The message was brief. Maya, I heard about your company's success. I wanted to reach out and apologize for my behavior at Techstone. I realize now that I was wrong about everything. If you're ever willing to talk, I'd like to make things right. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about forgiveness, second chances, and the difference between genuine remorse and damage control. Finally, I deleted the email without responding. Some bridges, once burned, weren't meant to be rebuilt. Some apologies came too late to matter. And sometimes, the best response to people who'd tried to destroy you was simply to succeed beyond their wildest nightmares and never look back. Outside the warehouse windows, the Seattle skyline sparkled in the evening light. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably updating his LinkedIn profile and trying to explain to potential employers why he'd been terminated from his senior developer position. Bradley was starting a consulting practice and hoping no one would dig too deeply into why he'd left his last job. David was adjusting to his demotion and wondering how his promising management career had derailed so completely. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about the future, about the clients who were waiting for our platform to launch, the employees who were counting on me to build something sustainable and meaningful, and the other women and minorities in tech who needed to know that success was possible, even when the system seemed rigged against them. 6 months ago, I was Maya Rodriguez, the supposed diversity hire who cried in bathroom stalls and questioned whether she deserved to be in tech. Today, I'm Maya Rodriguez, CEO and founder, proving every single day that talent has no color, no gender, and no limits when given the chance to flourish. I'd stopped being the diversity hire they'd tried to marginalize. Now I was the CEO they wished they'd never messed with. And to anyone out there who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever been called a diversity hire or made to feel like they're taking up space that isn't theirs, remember this. Sometimes the people trying to keep you down are just afraid of what happens when you rise up. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything you ever deserved and more. Your worth isn't determined by their acceptance. Your value isn't measured by their approval. And your success doesn't require their permission. Build your own table, create your own opportunities. And when they finally realize what they lost, make sure you're too busy succeeding to care. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.